If they do, that is great. So welcome to our presentation today. We are super excited to have you all here. Today, we are going to be talking about who's in the room, invisible identities, and effective campus engagement. So we're going to introduce ourselves. Hi, everyone. My name is Adriana Italiano. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a BGSU graduate and a current grad student here in the College Student Personnel Program. I currently work in non-traditional military student services as a non-traditional advisor and program coordinator, and I'm super excited to have you all here today.
And then hello, everyone. My name is Annastashia Blesi. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I graduated with a degree in physics from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and I'm also working on my master's with Adriana in our College Student Personnel Program. I currently act as the Graduate Leadership Coordinator for the Office of Residence Life, and I work in accessibility services as a practicum student. So we will just go over our outline for a little bit, and our outline is recursive. So we're going to introduce an identity, talk about terminology, and then talk about some ways that you can support them with effective programming and leadership. And then we'll close this with resources. And so first, we will go ahead and talk about just some invisible identities. I'm going to put up a poll everywhere. So if you want to get your phone out and text this really long thing, very sorry for my name, 222-333, and just say, how would you define invisible identities? And I will make the poll active. We'll give you like a minute or two.
I'm going to put the text information in the chat for you as well, so you can see that. And we just want to know, thinking about this presentation and trying to see where everyone is at, just when you think of the term invisible identity, what first comes to your mind? You can also throw any responses in the chat as well, and we'll make sure those get included in.
Okay, we have something not seen. Another person would not know that identity just by looking at you. An identity that may greatly affect someone's day-to-day life, but people don't know about it. Identities that aren't always represented in leadership of groups, or identities that are typically presented in appearance or thought, that impact someone's life and may be unnoticed or unrepresented by others. These are all great.
Yeah.
I'm going to deactivate this. And so, Adriana, if you want to take.
Yeah, and so can you move over to the next one? And so now thinking about our definitions and everything that we just talked about, which are all super great, in the same poll, it's the same number, you're just going to text a different response of what are some examples that you can think of. And so, you know, thinking of things that aren't seen and some that may be not representative, what are some examples you could tell us? Yes, LGBTQ plus community, disability, mental illnesses, yes. Faith is a huge one, yes.
Family status, that one's huge. Keep them coming. We'll give you like 30 more seconds. And if you agree with one, if you really want to make it kind of impactful on this little flow chart, you can type it as well. So if there's something that it's very powerful to you, you can also type that response. Illness, IBD,
Yep, physical illnesses, perfect. Military status, yes. Awesome. So I think we have some really good, feel free to throw some more in the chat too, but we're gonna keep it moving along. And so thinking about these invisible identities, you all are right on the mark. And so if you wanna move ahead, Anastasia. So yeah, invisible identities are those that cannot be easily determined from visible cues. And so as we're walking along our lives and interacting with others, these are things that right from the get-go, when you see somebody, you may not be able to know or notice. And so talking about ability and disability status, sexuality and gender, military, non-traditional adult learners, first generation students are huge on our college campus and are super important. Thinking about race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, religion and faith, how we talked about just a few minutes earlier, political affiliation, which is a major topic today, as well as addiction status. And so this is not a fully encompassing list. And I would encourage, as we're going through today, if you are thinking about any others, feel free to let us know. But we're going to focus on the top 5. So looking at ability and disability status, sexuality and gender, military, non-traditional, and first gen. And so this graphic here, I think, gives a really good representation of what we're looking at. And so we often hear of the story of the Titanic and how they thought it was a smaller glacier than what it actually was, because all of this was underneath. And so as folks are walking through their lives, these are things we may not always know. That could be their family status, their beliefs, work style, talents, education, learning styles, values. And so thinking about, as we are working through our time together today, thinking about those identities and how, as emerging leaders, you all can use those to build community within your student organizations and within the places that you are in.
Yeah, and to emphasize that, even thinking about something as maybe simple or as invisible as a learning style, how valued does it make you feel when your professor is just spot on the money with how you learn, right? You vibe real well, you enjoy going to that class because you can learn there. And so when we're thinking about invisible identities, how are we making students feel when they just can't be in that space because they don't feel welcome or they don't feel included? So the first one we're going to talk about today is students with disabilities. And when we think about students with disabilities, I want us to consider all sorts of disability, right? A student might approach with a mobility impairment or some sort of physical disability, and understanding that that may not be visible every day, right? So you can say, oh, well, they were using crutches, but now they're not, and so they're not disabled anymore, but they could have a chronic condition that just ebbs and flows. Thinking about other chronic health conditions, food allergies, sensory disabilities, and then other invisible disabilities, like a student could be hard of hearing in your space. Are you utilizing a microphone to help everyone in the space hear, but also it really helps that one student that you may never know that that student is hard of hearing? And so I want to discuss some terminology that is no longer used versus commonly accepted. And when I say commonly accepted, I don't necessarily mean that this is appropriate for every single person or every single person agrees with this. It's just the commonly accepted ones. And so one of the things we no longer use is to say just the disabled or the handicapped. Even when we're talking about restrooms or parking spaces, like it's more appropriate to say an accessible parking space, because that's what it is. It provides access to someone who is not able to use the other ones. The restroom itself does not have a handicap. The restroom itself is not disabled. It's just providing access to someone who needs it. But when we're talking about people, we want to make sure we're using person first. So people with disabilities, and then sometimes people might prefer to just be called like a disabled person. I identify as a disabled person, but you have to get to know me to know that. And so it's always appropriate to first start out with people with, and then if you know the person, or if it's a specific community that might identify as a disability first, like you would get to know that as it comes. Another thing that's a personal pet peeve is wheelchair bound. Nobody is bound to a wheelchair. He's like roped in and can never leave it. People who use wheelchairs lounge on their couches with potato chips and watch Netflix just like, you know, the average person. So we just say wheelchair user uses a wheelchair. Another thing, cripple and victim. Nobody's a victim. They're not suffering from things. They're just a person with a disability or has a disability. We try to stray away from normal, especially when you're comparing, right? So a normal person would do X, Y, and Z because we don't actually know what defines normal. But more especially, we don't know that that person doesn't also have some sort of other ailment with them. Mental handicap, intellectual disability, it's more formal, but it also actually describes what's happening. We never use the R word. If you don't know what the R word is, it is retarded. Just no. And if you're using that to describe anything in your life, homework, a test, people, evaluate why you're using that word and think of other words that you may be able to use. And then another important one is hearing impaired, and the deaf community, so that's another disability first kind of thing, prefers deaf or hard of hearing. So a person is hard of hearing, they may be a deaf person, but especially make sure to capitalize those letters. So how do we engage students? That's why you're here. You want to make your org better and engage these students. Understand that large groups may be overstimulating to lots of folks with disabilities. Some people may struggle processing, so understanding what someone is saying when there's a lot of background noise, tons of music. So if you're trying to have just like a group conversation, maybe find a space that's more comfortable and quieter with less noise in the background. And if you do need to have a program that has huge amounts of noise, maybe try to provide a separate space if you do need to have more one-on-one conversations. Understand that people's tones of voice, body language, and facial expression may not convey their intention, and know that your body language, tone of voice, or facial expression may not be understood by someone else. And so try to be very clear, welcoming, opening, stray away from sarcasm, especially if you don't know anybody in the space and you're really trying to hold like a more formal meeting. And then another great thing is to have agendas sent out before meetings and minutes after. It lets students figure out what they might want to say for the meeting, especially if you're doing an important vote on something or you want students to prep ahead. But also minutes lets them reflect on what happened during the meeting. And if they weren't able to pay attention, they can go back and see what happened. More ways to engage students is making sure that the space itself is accessible. How does a student get to your space? Is it cluttered? Would a person who uses a wheelchair, crutches, a cane, or anything like that be able to move around the space? Make sure everything is reachable, especially if you're having programming with children involved. You know, a lot of times we might think, oh, an adult would be able to throw this X far, but can a child do that if you're wanting to engage the community? And then is there space to move around? Can everyone be in there without being claustrophobic? If you host a large or loud event, could you have a smaller processing space? Something that the Resident Student Association did when we invited the local community for Halloween Fun Fest last year was rented the room next to the multi-purpose room to have just a processing space for children to go if they were overstimulated, overwhelmed, if they wanted to read a book, or just large things weren't their jam. So what are other things you could do? You can invite students from DREAM, which is Disability Rights, Education, Awareness, and Mentoring. It's a local disability group created by students to come speak to your organization or co-host a program with them. If you're more interested in learning about disability and what Accessibility Services on campus does, you can attend a training. And I'm going to send these slides out, and so you'll have these dates as well. And then another great thing to do is just have an accessibility statement on your advertising, and it doesn't need to be big and bold or anything. But if you're especially wanting people to RSVP or they have questions, you can just throw in, if you have questions, need accommodations, or want to RSVP, please contact whoever you're trying to contact at whatever email. So thinking about that, if you want to reflect in the chat, what are some things that you could do to bring, what are some things that you could bring back to improve accessibility in your student organization? And just throw it in the chat. We'll give you like 1 minute. And know that we can see who's attending, so we might just call you out and just expect something from certain people. All right, marinate on that. We'll move on to our next section. But while we're marinating, I think Morgan Scanlon, I want an answer from you by the end of this one.
Perfect. Yeah. So let's move on talking about LGBTQ plus students. And so again, another invisible identity that is super important, and thinking about on a college campus, the students that you will be working with as emerging leaders is super important. So thinking about specific terminology, the difference between gender and sex. We know gender is a social construct that at some point somebody just made up, that blue is for boys and pink is for girls. And so not everyone is going to stick to that binary. And I think that's awesome and really should be included and celebrated within your student organizations and within your leadership teams. And so thinking the differences between gender and sex, gender is fluid, it can be changed, it can be adapted, and how somebody may present their gender may be different than their biological sex that they were born with. And so as we are trying to create communities that are inclusive and ones that speak to a sense of belonging, we want to make sure that we are working to become educated to learn about that for ourselves, but also know how we can bring that back to our student organizations. And so also thinking about some terminology that we may not have heard before, thinking about folks that may be straight passing or straight acting. And so those are folks within the community that oftentimes may be perceived as straight or perceived as one gender when they may not identify as such. And oftentimes that is associated with some privilege as well. But we know that these identities exist and they are invisible. And so the assumptions that oftentimes folks are bringing into the room of that person is straight, they may or may not have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, definitely can be harmful as we're thinking about how can we be inclusive to everyone that's in the room. And so straight acting is somebody that may have to hide who they are and may not feel included or have that sense of community. And I think that's a great opportunity that if you know somebody that is struggling and you know somebody that may not be able to fit within a binary or things like that, be able to include them and educate yourself to know how to best support them, and asking them their pronouns, asking how they identify, to be able to know and be able to be that support system for our students.
So we want to wrap everything that we have that we're giving you in a bow of what can you do. So you can create a supportive community in your organization, even if you feel like your organization has nothing to do with LGBTQ students, right? You're a STEM organization. The students within your organization still may be LGBTQ students. And when we're thinking about supporting a student and having people engaged in our communities, we want to make sure that every piece of them feels valued. And so a simple way to do this, if you and your organization are comfortable, is using your pronouns and normalizing just introducing yourself with them. Now, I would never make this a mandatory ask within your organization, because you never know who is not comfortable sharing the pronouns that they want to use. You don't know who's going to not be outed for pronouns and usage like that. But, something that Adriana and I did was, my name is Annastashia. I use she, her, and her pronouns. And the more fluid you can make it, it might engage other students to participate in sharing their pronouns. So create a supportive campus, learn and listen to other LGBTQ plus voices. And so, pay attention to those campus updates when they get sent out and there's something about LGBTQ's History Month or, different programming involved. Your organization can go to that programming without being recreating the wheel and trying to do your own programming for it. And that's another way to support that kind of programming, is to just have people there. Using inclusive language. So when we're thinking about inclusive language, we're thinking about really like gender inclusion. And so instead of using men and women, you use everyone. Hey guys, something that the higher ed community loves is, hey folks. You could drop down to the south with me and go y'all, anything like that. Using partner instead of boyfriend, girlfriend. You could also use significant other, especially if you're curious about someone's status in a relationship. You can say, hey, like, where's your significant other? Or if you're inviting boyfriends to come to the organization, invite partners to come. And then, using sibling. Do you have siblings instead of do you have any sisters? Stuff like that. And then collaborate with other student organizations and celebrate what the work they're doing. You can invite the Queer Trans Student Union to come speak at your meeting. If you're a book club, there's a queer literature club. And so you could just kind of merge and combine and see what that is. And then celebrate queer days of celebration and education as a community. And this can still relate back to what your organization is. So we wrote down some important days. We have the International Trans Day of Visibility. We know that LGBTQ Pride Month is in June, but if you have an active, summer organization or social media, you can still post to celebrate. LGBTQ History Month, our offices hold a lot of resources and programming about LGBTQ History Month, so your student org could go by celebrating National Coming Out Day, International Pronoun Day, and Trans Day of Remembrance. And there's so many more of these days of celebration on any map that you can find. And so, thinking about that.
Yeah, so feel free. If you have any questions or if you're thinking about these things, or what are some ways that your student organization works to be inclusive of LGBTQ folks on campus? And so if you just want to put that in the chat, we would love to hear from you. I know specifically in the student organizations that I have led in the past and have led today, that we really try to focus on building that community and, with every introduction, having our pronouns and making sure that if somebody needs some time away to be able to reflect on certain things, or especially on big things in the news that folks may be struggling with, to be able to have that time to reflect. And so we want to hear from you. So feel free to put in the chat, or if you have any questions, we'll give you a minute or so.
And if you're thinking about programming while you're considering and chatting with us, you could find, oh, heck yeah, Peyton, putting our pronouns at the end of the names in our Zoom calls. You can also put your pronouns on your Canvas page. So especially right now when we're not knowing who our people are, right? We might not be able to meet anybody in person. It can be super important to put your pronouns on your Canvas when you're having a discussion with someone else. So that is a great point, Peyton.
Awesome. Well, we're going to also move on then to talking about non-traditional military students. And so I work with these folks on a daily basis, and they have so much to offer and a lot of things that are great. Yeah, Morgan, I think it's extremely important to be aware of your audience in every leadership situation. You never know who could be a part of what community, and even if unintentional, you could offend someone if unaware. And that is important to remember. That is something my organization on campus has been very good at. That is awesome. That definitely hits the nail on the head. We want to make sure that, BGSU strives to have a community that is full of belonging and inclusivity. And the more your orgs get better at it, the more folks you're going to be able to engage. And so thinking about non-traditional military students, BGSU specifically defines non-traditional students as those that are, can you move the slide, Annastashia? Thank you. So students that are 23 and older, so those are students that are coming to college for the first time and maybe over the age of 23, which we see the traditional age being 18 to 22. So students who are parents that have a child or children or some sort of dependent legal guardian, as well as students that are military affiliated. And so we define military affiliation as those that are active duty, that are currently serving or deployed, reservists, veterans, dependents, those are spouses or children of those that have served, in the National Guard. And so it's important because these students are oftentimes not associated with the traditional college experience. And as student org leaders, we want to make sure that these students are just as engaged because they want to get to know you all and different things like that. So keeping in mind their different life roles, oftentimes these students they may be parents and have different schedules. They may be working full time, and being engaged fully in a student organization, maybe in a leadership position, may be more difficult. They may be abruptly activated or deployed, especially in times of COVID. We did have many students that were activated in our Ohio National Guard, and some had less than 24 hours to figure out classes and student org requirements and everything to then be helping our communities. And so these folks may also be married and have a partner, and may feel excluded from their peers, especially, one of the most heartbreaking stories I heard is when a student who was starting his college experience with his daughter at the same time, when it came to the first day of classes and orientation and SOAR and opening weekend, when we're so excited to be able to welcome all these students, many people were just engaging him as if he was a parent and not the student that was also coming to class. And so thinking about how we can not assume. And so that brings me to my next point of thinking about what can we do as student leaders, of knowing that these students exist. As BGSU is a pretty large school with over 20,000 students. We have over 1,400 students on this campus that are part of our non-traditional military student services. And so that's almost 10% of your market that you could be working to engage and working to include. And I think that's really important. And with that is coming to check your assumptions, not assuming that every maybe older age person that you see on campus is a parent or a faculty member or a staff member, and not assuming that every military affiliated person may have seen war or have gone to a combat zone or has been deployed. And especially for programming and different things like that, providing inclusive timeframes. And so maybe events at 9-10 o'clock at night, while great for our college age students, may not be super friendly for non-traditional students that may have to come back to campus for that event or have to take care of getting kids to bed and things ready for school the next day. And making events family friendly so folks can bring their partners and their children and be able to experience all that together as a family. Including virtual opportunities and events that provide tangible experiences. So oftentimes we hear that our non-trads in our military, they struggle with the balancing of school, work, life, and all the things. And so the events and the orgs that they want to be a part of, they want to make sure that they're getting the most bang for their buck, really. And so if you're able to provide, resume workshops, if you're able to provide community service and different things like that, that there are real experiences that folks can not only get on their resume that are great for you all and other folks that are in a leadership position, but also those non-trads and military students that are trying to gain that experience as well. And then finally, being cognizant of schedules and time commitments. Like I said, all of us are trying to balance, especially now in a pandemic, of we may be home with our families, and children may be home from school for virtual learning, just like we all are. And so in a time that is wild, being cognizant of knowing that if you have leadership positions open for these students and that they are trying to get involved, that maybe having an executive meeting at 8 p.m. might clash with bedtime for kids, and thinking about that as well. And so also putting, we would love to hear from you in the chat. I think some of our conversations today have been super Super awesome. So what are some new ways your student org are looking to engage non-traditional military students, and how can we help with that? And so if you want to put anything in the chat, or if you have any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. So we'll give you about another minute or so.
While they put things in the chat, I'll share one of my experiences. I have a lot of friends, and even my mom is a non-traditional student. So, you know, one of the things my mom struggled with the most in engaging in student organizations and being involved on campus was that even specific services on campus, like the tutoring center and the career services center, they closed while she was at work. She took night courses. And so maybe even having programming where you're inviting those services to come to a meeting where then non-traditional students can come in at like 6 p.m., right, between work and going home for the evening, where now you are both engaging other students on campus, you're engaging non-traditional students, but also you're creating an incredible campus partnership if you maintain that good rapport with that organization on your campus. And so you're getting them really tangible numbers, because everyone loves, you know, how many students do we serve? You're getting them opportunities to serve students, even if it's after hours. And so that's an experience on the ways that your organization could engage some non-traditional military students.
Cool. Well, keep thinking, and if anything comes or any questions as we're moving along, feel free to put that in there, and we'd love to answer some questions at the end too.
All right, so now we're going to talk about first generation students. So BGSU defines first generation as a student whose parents have not earned a bachelor's degree, okay? And so different organizations will identify first generation differently. Some say parents who have not earned associate's degree. Some clarify with parents or guardians, or, you know, people you grew up with not earning some sort of tangible degree. And so in thinking about this, I was a first generation student. There are so many first generation students on campuses who may not just know what to expect when it comes to being an on-campus student. I learned what the bursar was from Hamilton, and I was already in college when I learned what the bursar was. And so, you know, when we're thinking about these things, 56% of students entering college in 2015, 2016 were first generation. Adriana was first generation. Both your presenters here. And many non-traditional students are first generation. And so thinking about how we're engaging non-traditional students, we need to couple that with how do we engage first generation students, and how do we make our expectations of what's going to happen very clear. So what can you do to support first generation students? In supporting their transition, you can make very clear where your campus organizations meet, right? BTSU. I was shaken when I got here and saw BTSU, because I thought it just meant BGSU. And then I had no idea where BGSU 207 or whatever number my first meeting was. And so, you know, spelling out Bowen Thompson Student Union, when you're talking about arenas, oh, let's just meet at the Stro. What's the Stro? I think it's the basketball arena. Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So I still get that mixed up, because I always think it's the Slater, and I've been here a year and a half and I get very confused. And so, you know, making sure that you're very clear about where you're meeting on campus, even if you need to like drop a map location into a group me, you're just saying, especially our confusing buildings like Epler, there's more than one Epler gym. So if you say you're meeting in the Epler gym, who knows where that is? And so you can have fun events where you meet in different campus spaces to introduce what the important parts of your campus are. So I always go back to having STEM meetings. I'm a physics gal at heart. And so if I were having an astronomy club meeting, well, maybe I would meet like in the planetarium one day or outside it to go like, this is an important building for us. And then I could meet in a different space on campus that hosts STEM classes or math classes. And so then students are able to get to know different parts of campus without it being so formal as a tour. Make your information accessible and known. So when you're talking about, stealing a sick poster, like, what's that? Why are you doing that? Like, what are some cool ways that you can engage other students to make them feel like they're belonging, but also make them not feel totally lost? Don't assume that culture, tradition, and slang are understood. Like I said with sick, if I was at my undergrad and some masked people in jumpsuits came like walking behind me screaming real loud, I'd be terrified. And so that is just not a tradition where I'm from in my undergrad. And so understanding that traditions are going to be different, especially if that person may have grown up like really appreciating Ohio State football, but now they're at Bowling Green State University and things are different. And then a super important one is just providing opportunities for mentoring and peer support, right? So you want to feel like you can rely on other people and that you're open to being engaged with these kinds of questions and stressful situations. So I really want answers for this.
Yes, I'm really excited. I want to know, what is something that you did not know, whether you are a first semester student this semester and we are so happy that you're here, or whether you are a fifth-year senior. What is something that you did not know your first semester at BGSU that you felt like everyone else did? So if you just want to throw that in the chat, if something comes to mind. The BTSU, BGSU one gets me every time. I still think oftentimes that, oh, that's just BGSU spelled wrong. So if you want to throw that in the chat and let us know, and maybe we can all find some similarities and some commonalities there. So we'll give you about another minute.
And this is even if you're not first generation. If you still get confused when your friends are like, oh, I live in Mac, like, and then you look on the building thing and that's not a building on campus, or, let's go to just like casually the Oaks, not saying like what the Oaks is, but I hear it all the time. It's like, let's go to the Oaks. Who is she? Like, what are the Oaks? No clue what the Stro was.
Definitely.
That is a great
one. This seal in the middle of the campus is huge. It's such a big tradition, but it's very confusing.
Do you want to explain the tradition behind it?
Yeah. So as a BGSU alum, I think the seal is so fun. And so you always walk to the right of the seal. If you walk to the left, it is a superstition, I guess, that you are going to fail your next exam. And where it gets pretty wild is that if you stand on the seal, there's a lot of conditions to this. Stand on the seal at midnight on a full moon with your significant other, and you kiss. So you got to meet all 4 of those requirements. Then you'll get married and be Falcon Flames. And so some of those fun things, especially in a time where we're in a pandemic and we're not always able to be in person, some of those traditions and culture things get lost. And so I really encourage your student organization that if you have first-year students or you are a first-year student, to be reaching out to folks with these questions, because we've all had them. I've been at BGSU for over 6 years now, and I still don't know all the answers. And so not being afraid to reach out, I think, is really important. Awesome.
So let's talk about some more resources, just overall general how to be inclusive resources. Use your advisors. Your student org should have an advisor. I believe everyone has to have at least a faculty advisor. Take time to think about strategic recruitment, especially during a pandemic. Who are you missing and how are you recruiting people? Are you just putting things in the campus update, or could you put things on every Monday? I found out this week. The BGSU Snapchat story does Flyer Monday. And so could you put flyers on the BGSU Snapchat story and then get more people involved? Thinking with your advisors about different ways to plan programming or recruit people. Develop campus partnerships across campus and across organizations. And so understanding that, especially for these students that we've identified, reaching out to campus resources may be particularly difficult, right? It takes a lot of confidence, it takes a lot of boldness. And so as student leaders and as organization leaders, you already have some sort of connection, right? You say, I'm the president of XYZ organization, and we would love to have someone from the tutoring center or the learning commons come speak. And that opens up this teeny little box for your students that are in those organizations to say, oh, well, Tabitha came and spoke to us last week. Let me go to the Learning Commons. And even if they just ask for the person who came and spoke, it's getting them one more step to be fully ingrained in the community. Develop a network of students outside campus. Use Facebook groups. GroupMes are huge. LinkedIn, go to different conferences for your student group interests, and try to develop a network of maybe I'll use Resident Student Association, for example, because I know there's a million of them. Maybe your resident student association can be engaged with the Toledo Resident Student Association, and then you can connect across the state to figure out what different things are doing and how you're able to engage different people. Seek out resources for continuing to learn, and that can just be for yourself. It doesn't have to be for your student organization, but to be a more effective leader, maybe you could go look at webinars or watch YouTube TED Talks, or anything that really engages your curiosity and engages your understanding of different kinds of identities will help you automatically become a greater leader, because you will have some sort of back burner where those ideas are currently on. And then, like I said, watch some YouTube videos or reach out to sibling orgs at other schools, especially if you know they're doing something really well, or if you want to share something that you're doing super well. Maybe you have 15% more people this year because you started to have your meetings at a different time where non-traditional students could join. Well, now go share that with the world.
Definitely. And so as we're wrapping up here, and we definitely want to leave a few minutes for questions because we want to be a resource for you all after, and we're going to put our emails down in the chat. And so this doesn't have to be the last time that we talk, and hopefully it's not, and we would love to connect some more. But just thinking about your organization's goals and mission, or your goals and your mission as a leader, as a student leader on campus, how do you see these identities fitting in, and how do these students, where can we get them to be more included, and that missing potential that is there, how can we make sure that they're being engaged? And so also thinking about the leadership skills that you want to gain as a leader, like Annastashia said, YouTube, TED Talks, webinars, especially in this time where, like we said, in these unprecedented times in the middle of a pandemic, there are so many free and virtual opportunities to be able to learn. So really dig into those. I would love to share some resources with anybody later on if they would have any to share, and I would love to share some of my faves at the moment. But also thinking about the community that you're building and what your goals are for your organization to build that community, and what kind of community do we want to build? We hear that term thrown around a lot, but what does that mean for you all and for your organization? And think about why you are building that community. It goes beyond BGSU just wanting to, include other folks and be inclusive and build a network. But the lifelong friends and the lifelong learning that you're coming from also helps as well. So those are just some things that in the back of your mind as you're trying to delve into all these things that we've talked about today, trying to keep those at the forefront of why are you doing this? And you're already taking a great step by being part of this today. So we really appreciate that you're here and learning with us. And so with that, I believe the next slide is one for questions. So we have some resources too, and we'll share out the slides if you all would like. But feel free to use there's a Q&A function as well as a chat function. So if you want to know anything or have any questions about our experiences, feel free to put that in, and we'll be here for a few more minutes as well. So thank you all for having us, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. And just one more little tidbit of advice as you formulate questions to ask us, right? Because we're Sage. Think about how you can tangibly express what you're doing in your organization. This will help me with your resume, and when you're talking about like doing interviews and stuff like that, like diversity and inclusion is very huge in the corporate world right now and stuff like that. And so if you're currently a leader or you're aspiring to be a leader, think about what you can say about what the changes you've made. either as a result of this presentation or not. We hope that you've gained some sort of insight from this presentation. But even if you haven't, start thinking about what you're gaining from your leadership experience. So we'll just be hanging out for the next like 6 minutes. If you want to offer us questions, it's up to you.
If not, have a great rest of your day and a happy Saturday.
Definitely put my email to just the panelists, so you know everything's fine.
That makes sense. I was like, why is it in there twice?
Yeah, I saw it said all panelists, and I was like, ah, poo. Peyton, is your last name pronounced Wisniewski? Because my kindergarten teacher was also named Wisniewski, and that is, I've been out of the North for a long time. It was my kindergarten teacher in Michigan, but I've yet to see another Wisniewski since kindergarten. So I think that's really cool. It'd be especially cool if you were related to her. I don't remember her first name. So if you have a relative that taught kindergarten at Mountain Park Elementary School, she was my teacher.
Hey, Harry, do you need anything else from us then? A lot of us really come. That makes sense, especially up here. I feel like Ohio is very Polish. Do you all need anything from us, like our slides or anything then after this?
We do not. So you two are good to go if you would like. Great job, though. That was awesome.
Thanks. That was fun.
That Jordan Hamilton person is one of the students I just hired for work.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for the student services quality monitor thing.
Oh, fun. Cool. Well, thanks, Harry. This was super fun. Hopefully everyone learned something.
Yeah, that was fun. Good job, guys.
Right.
Thanks.
Ooh, that was weird. I haven't said like good job, guys, in so long. I don't know why I just said that. Okay. Good job, everyone.
just go down south with me, say y'all, you know.
Have a great rest of your day. I will chat with you all later. We're gonna upload this video, so you'll have this if you need to use it for like digital resume or something like that. But
you know it's gonna go in the portfolio.
Heck yeah, it is.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.